being courageous enough to confront these actions in ourselves gives us the opportunity to make new decisions about who we want to be and how we show up in the world. And that is reason alone to stop hiding behind the label of mistake and calling the situation what it actually is. You're listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight perfectionism and overwhelm so they can smash their goals without all the drama. I'm your host, recovering overachiever turned professional life coach, Elizabeth Burrows. Let's get to it. Good day, good people. I'm Coach Elizabeth, your favorite life coach and podcast host, back again with another banger of an episode here on the Life Edit Project podcast. I'm really excited. This is episode 49. And I'm just super excited to be here and glad and grateful as always that you are taking the time to tune in. So, how you doing? Maybe we should check in more before I just dive into these episodes. How you doing? I want to know how you doing. Hit me up on social media. I am at Life Edit Project on Instagram, Facebook. I'm still on Twitter, and yes, I'm calling it Twitter, and Threads. I'm hanging out a lot over on Threads, just shooting the breeze and chatting and connecting with folks. So definitely come check me out over there. I hope that things are great and amazing and fun in your life right now. You know, I would honestly love to say that everything is awesome over here on this end, but if I'm being honest, things have actually been a little bit chaotic on this side of the mic. Okay, not to sound dramatic. I don't want to alarm you. Everything is fine. Nothing's, on fire, but life has been lifing like real hard, and it's been throwing some major curveballs at me lately. And honestly, I'm tired of swinging at them. Like, real talk, I just want a break. I want things to just ease on up for a little bit, and I want things to feel easy for a little while. And that's just not what life feels like right now. And I think more than wanting things to feel easy, I want to feel like I know what the heck I'm doing. I want to feel like I'm making good choices and doing all the right things. And maybe that's the perfect setup for today's podcast episode, because today we're talking about mistakes. And part of what I'm feeling these days is the weight of judging myself for the mistakes that I've made in the past. And if I'm going to keep on being honest, because I like to keep it real, judging myself for all of the mistakes that I'm scared of making now and in the future, as I try to just navigate and find my way through this season of life. Because you can read a lot of books about life and you can listen to all the podcast episodes about life. But the fact is that you just have to figure things out as you go. And that doesn't always feel good. It feels very uncertain, and it feels like mistakes are just happening. But what if I told you that there's no such thing as a mistake? And I know right now, like if I were sitting in front of you, you would probably be looking at me like I'm crazy. I bet you could even rattle off a list of your own mistakes right now off the top of your head, proving that you have, in fact, made many, many mistakes in life. So you believe that you've made mistakes. I've just admitted that I believe that I've made mistakes and I'm bound to make more. And, it's pretty common knowledge that everyone makes mistakes. And I'm not actually here to argue that point. I'm not going to try to convince you that you're wrong about having made mistakes yourself. But I do want to challenge your perceptions. And I want to invite you to examine what it is that you think you know. I want to shake things up a bit so that you start asking yourself more questions, because questions lead to answers and answers lead to insights. And so today, I'm not going to try to tell you that mistakes aren't real, that they don't exist, but here is what I'll say instead. The word mistake is a label that we apply to such a wide variety of situations that it's actually overused. And we have overused the word mistake so much that we have diluted its meaning. And I think that it is extremely unhelpful. I think whenever we use the term mistake, we are obscuring the nuance of what's actually happening. And the word mistake is such an emotionally charged word, and that charge is often negative. It's such an emotionally charged word that it makes it hard to feel anything different around the situation. When you feel so negatively about making mistakes, it then becomes very hard to feel positive or even just neutral about the situations and the actions that you are calling a mistake. And that right there is reason enough to stop calling everything a mistake. The word mistake is literally in the way of your ability to absorb a fuller spectrum of reality. So today, let's run a little thought experiment together and just throw out the word mistake. Bloop, that's it. We just threw it away. So then the question becomes, how do we talk about life and the things that happen in life without using the word mistake? And that, my friends, is what we're going to explore in the rest of this conversation. Let's go. All right. So we're not allowed to talk about mistakes anymore. But that doesn't mean that we get to just ignore all of the things that are happening. Instead, we're just going to get better at acknowledging the nuance, the particulars of what's happening in our lives. And to do that, we have to consider what it is that we usually mean when we call something a mistake. And I've come up with a list of 5 things that are very frequently the things that we refer to when we are applying the label mistake. And so we're going to take these one by one. I'm going to give you some examples, talk about what they mean, and we're just going to take it from there. So the first situation that we tend to apply the word mistake to would be those things that we do on purpose that come with unforeseen or unintentional, unwanted consequences. Yeah, I'll say that again. So things that we do on purpose, right? So we mean to do them, but they come with unforeseen or unintentional, unwanted consequences. So we mean to do the thing, but then the result of the thing that we did on purpose is not the thing that we thought would happen, or it's not the thing that we intended to happen. And we call it a mistake. Now, you know that you're in this type of scenario when you hear yourself saying things like, oh, if I had known that X would happen, I never would have done Y. Right? So this type of scenario is such a very normal part of the human experience. And it's normal and it's common because as humans, we're limited and our knowledge and our insight is finite. And it is impossible to always have perfect knowledge of a situation, and especially to have perfect knowledge of what has not yet happened or occurred. And honestly, in our world today, because things are so interconnected, and because we come in contact with so many different kinds of people, it's becoming increasingly difficult to predict how something that you do will affect someone else, because there are just so many layers of connection in our lives and in our society. And so, given those limitations, given our inability to perfectly know a situation and connections and interactions and dynamics, and given our inability to perfectly know how the future will unfold, sometimes the best you can do, actually, no, not sometimes, in any situation, the best you can do is to make the best decision you can based on the information and the perspective that you have in the moment. And when you do that, just because it comes with or generates an unforeseen, unwanted consequence does not have to mean that you were wrong. All it needs to be is evidence that you are limited. That's it. And if we can practice just seeing situations and decisions as evidence of our humanity instead of evidence that we are wrong, imagine all of the possibilities that might open up for ourselves. Imagine all of the wisdom that you might be able to extract from a situation like that when your perception starts to expand and when you are confronted with more information that then positions you to make a different decision. Okay, the second type of scenario that we tend to apply the word mistake to would be those things that we do on purpose that have foreseeable but seemingly avoidable unwanted consequences. So this second scenario is very similar to the first scenario in that we're doing something on purpose and it generates an unwanted consequence, right? Situation 1 and situation 2 have that in common. But the difference here is that we know that the unwanted consequence can happen. We just don't think that it will happen to us. And I'm laughing because I can picture so many situations where I have fallen into this trap. And all this is again, evidence of our humanity. All this is situations where we are being unrealistic. We are making choices. We're taking deliberate action and we're choosing to believe that the action will generate something other than the unwanted consequence that we know is a possibility. And these kinds of situations are very difficult to face because they force us to confront a part of ourselves that acts differently than the way that we want to see ourselves. When we acknowledge situations where we take deliberate, intentional action and end up earning an unwanted consequence that we totally saw coming, it forces us to recognize the fact that sometimes who we are, the way we show up, is different than how we imagine ourselves to be. And confronting this reality, confronting these types of scenarios doesn't have to generate shame, which is often why we avoid looking at them too hard and we just decide to call them a mistake. And when we call it a mistake, we convince ourselves that we didn't know it was going to happen. And that's so easy to do because we feel often ashamed at the decisions that we make, at the unwanted consequences that we run towards. But taking the time and being courageous enough to confront these actions in ourselves gives us the opportunity to make new decisions about who we want to be and how we show up in the world. And that is reason alone to stop hiding behind the label of mistake and calling the situation what it actually is. So that's the second scenario. Now, a third scenario, totally changing gears, that we tend to apply the term mistake to are much simpler. They're what I like to call misfires. They are these moments when our body is doing something different than what we are telling it to do. So an example of this type of quote unquote mistake is So something potentially really harmless would be making a typo, right? So if you're typing and you press the letter S instead of the letter D on the keyboard, right? And you make a typo. Or let's use the example from the movie Mean Girls. You're thinking both great and cool at the same time, and the word that comes out of your mouth is gruel, right? So that is a misfire. Your brain is sending out multiple signals, and your body acts on a signal that is different than the signal that you thought you were sending out, right? And it's worthwhile to be able to identify these types of scenarios and these types of misfires, because there's no reason to have judgment around these types of situations. They are often just things that are outside of our conscious control. Oftentimes, when we're talking about mistakes, we usually want to assign blame to someone for the mistake. Who's responsible for the mistake? Who's at fault for the mistake? And my friend, it is rarely useful to assign blame for something that is actually outside of your control. It's no one's fault if it was no one's choice. Ooh, that was good. Somebody write that down. Okay, so that's the third type of scenario that we tend to call a mistake. A fourth type of scenario that we tend to label as a mistake are those learning experiences that are really uncomfortable, really intensely displeasureful. Is that a word? Displeasureful? I don't know, but I like it. It sounds good. So some lessons are easy to learn. Other lessons are really hard to learn, but they are valuable lessons. They're the kinds of lessons that make us wiser, and they're the kinds of lessons that make us stronger when we have them. And as we are learning them, they help us develop the character of our being. But the problem with these types of learning experiences is that they don't feel good. And this type of scenario, I think, really shines a light on how often we tend to assign the label mistake to a situation simply because it feels bad. And my friend, we gotta stop doing this. You can't keep calling everything a mistake just because it doesn't feel good. Just because it makes you uncomfortable. Because guess what? It's impossible to completely avoid discomfort in life. And just because something makes you uncomfortable, or just because an experience is uncomfortable, does not mean that it is wrong or that it should not have happened. And that is often the connotation and the weight and the judgment that we bring to a scenario when we call it a mistake. We usually mean this should not have happened. And I want you to question that assumption. Okay, the fifth type of scenario that we tend to call a mistake would be things that we do that other people think we should not have done. Think about a time when, let's say, maybe you were a child, or maybe even you were an adult, and you were told or instructed to apologize to someone for something that you did, even though you did not feel sorry. Can you think of that? Do you have that situation in mind? In those types of scenarios, someone is telling you that you were wrong. But if you don't believe that you were wrong, was it actually a mistake? I would love to say that this type of scenario only happens in childhood, and when we become adults, we have more autonomy and we get to decide what is right and what we call mistakes. But the fact is that we never reach the magical age where other people's opinions don't matter and don't factor into our lives. Now, of course, as you get older and you practice valuing your own opinion over the opinion of others, you can learn not to be guided and not to live your life strictly based on other people's opinions. But because we're humans and we're social creatures and we live in societies where we interact and depend on other people, we are never in a position where we can fully just ignore other people's perceptions of reality and other people's interpretations of what should and should not happen. I mean, we literally live in a society where laws govern our society, and laws were made by people. The laws that you live under did not make themselves. Somebody at some point decided that this is what should be done. Or somebody at some point decided that this is a thing that nobody should ever do under any circumstances, and they made it illegal, right? So even the things, the ideas that govern our society and rules and policies in workplaces, right? All of those things are someone's ideal of what should or should not happen. But what happens when your values don't align with the values that are guiding the situation that you are living in? That is when people will tell you you made a mistake. And I want you to question that every single time. When you feel like you are right, or when you believe that you are acting on your values, when you are standing 10 toes down on your personal values and principles, and someone is telling you that you are wrong or that you have made a mistake, I want that to be a signal to you that that is not the objective truth. That at some point somebody made an interpretation, and while you don't have to agree, and while you may decide to adopt someone else's interpretation or to govern yourself according to what someone else's perception or interpretation of what should and should not be is, it doesn't have to mean that you take on the weight or the label of having made a mistake. So I hope that this conversation today is just giving you some food for thought, is giving you an opportunity to examine what it is that the word mistake means to you. And of course, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. I feel like I'm giving out a lot of homework in season 2 of this show. So that's a thing. Expect more of that. So your homework for today's episode is to think about some of the mistakes that you've made and reevaluate them. I want you to take 3 mistakes that you think that you have made. And I want you to remove the label mistake and ask yourself, which one of these 5 categories does that quote unquote mistake fall into? And maybe it's none of these. Maybe you can think of a totally different category for the thing that you've been calling a mistake. And I encourage you to do that. And the point is this: you don't have to fight so hard to hold on to your mistakes. And I would actually argue that you should not hold on to the belief that the things that you've done were quote unquote mistakes if that belief holds you back from moving forward. My friend, you cannot stay stuck in your mistakes forever and create the life that you want. You've got to choose. If you are feeling stuck under the weight of a mistake, or even under the weight of a series of mistakes, I would love to help you move forward, and I would do that through my one-on-one coaching services. Just tap the link that's in the show notes to open up my calendar and book a sales call with me. And in that call, we're going to hop on Zoom and you will tell me about the mistake that you want to move past, and I will tell you how I can help you find a path forward. Because staying where you are is not an option when you're working with me. And there is no mistake that you cannot recover from. Boom. Yes. Whew, okay, so that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hit me up on social media and let me know what you liked about this episode. I love getting notes from listeners. And while you're at it, go ahead and leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for a chance to get a shout out on the show in a future episode and be my listener bae of the week. I need some more listener baes, okay? All right, y'all. I will be back in your ears next week with another fresh episode. In the meantime, in between time, go make something that's not a mistake. Peace. Hey, thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you have a question or a favorite insight from today's conversation, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message on social media. I'm in all the places. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word. And of course, my accounts are linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you, so holla at your girl. I'll be back in your ears next week with a fresh episode. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Life Edit Project podcast wherever you like to listen so that you don't miss a thing. Until then, peace.